Good morning. Thank you for joining this live stream.
Good morning.
My name is Remco Jansonius. I am the Deputy Director for Collections and Curatorial Affairs at Vizcaya Museum and Gardens, and I am joined here by Tamara McDonald.
Good morning, everyone. Tamara McDonald here with the Deering Estate. I'm with the Museum Department in the Curatorial and Registration area.
So just to give you a little background about Vizcaya before we get into it. Vizcaya is located right on the shores of Biscayne Bay. It was built between 1914 and 1922, and it includes a main house with 34 decorated rooms, formal gardens, a mangrove shoreline, hardwood hammock, both protected areas, and a historic village that at the time served to support the estate. And our mission is to preserve Vizcaya's cultural and environmental resources, to engage people in connecting with the past, understanding the present, and shaping the future. Tamara, you want to say something about the Deering Estate?
So I will bounce off of what you said and say that the Deering Estate is an amazing 450 plus acre property. At the center of that, we have the Historic House Museums, and it is a challenge for us every day to interpret history and culture and the natural world here. It is an amazing place to do that, and the location itself just gives information at every turn. You have a lot of the history that connects to our location being a lot of different perspectives over very big and small issues. So it's a wonder.
All right, thank you, Tamara. And you're going to find out more about both Vizcaya and the Deering Estate. So let me start with saying that today, 125 years plus 2 days ago, there were 444 individuals who placed their signature on the documents that incorporated the city of Miami. So happy anniversary, Miami. Now, to commemorate this anniversary, we decided to do this live stream. Actually, it's a series of several live streams over several days. And in this particular one, Tamara and I will be talking about the Deering Estate and about Vizcaya. Now, of course, the history of these estates does not reach as far back as the history of the city of Miami itself. But still, let's keep in mind that both Charles Deering of the Deering Estate and James Deering of Viscaya, they first started coming to South Florida and to Miami in the very early 1900s, possibly even in the late 1800s, the very late 1800s, because their father, William Deering, had a property and spent time here in South Florida as well. So, it's clear that whatever Charles and James both created here in Vizcaya was influenced by the city of Miami, by the very young city of Miami. But they both and their estates also left their mark on the development of this city. So over the past couple of weeks, Tamara and I had a few conversations in preparation for this live stream, and we both discovered a few things that were totally new about our own states, about each other's estates, and we had fun in the process also. So we hope that you'll find out some new things about the Deering Estate and about Viscaya, and that you'll have fun during the process as well. So Tamara, take it away.
Okay, so what I'll start with.
May I add one thing? So that Ms. Tamara and myself here, but also invisible and behind the scenes, we have Alex Cerna, and she is really the one who makes all of this work. And she is also monitoring the chat in this live stream. So if you have any questions or any comments, put them in the chat, and Alex will bring them to our attention in the course of this live stream. Sorry, keep going, Tamara.
So I'll start by talking about the structure that really is kind of the heart of our estate. We have the stone house, which is what you see in the photo here. And one of the main rooms in the first floor of that house is the Great Hall. And here we like to make connections to the architecture of the stone house, which is very important to the history of Miami. It is a Mediterranean revival style construction, and it's everything that you think of when you think 1920s glamour and these elaborate estate homes. And you end up with features between here and with Vizcaya that are major points of that architectural style. Everything from ironwork doors and elaborate gold gilt ceilings to clay tile roofs and limestone. And it all creates the Miami that we kind of know today.
Yeah, Tamara. So what you're saying, about the Deering Estate and about Viscaya, this Mediterranean revival style, it's very important in the development of the city. Coral Gables also, but digging a little deeper in the architectural style of Viscaya. So at the time prior to construction, it seemed pretty clear that Vizcaya would become a Spanish-style house. Deering had admired James Deering. Sorry, I have to be clear here. James Deering had admired what he had seen in Seville, Spain, during one of his several trips there, and no doubt, of course, James was also influenced by Charles. Charles was a Hispanist, and he owned several properties in Spain. So it came a bit as a surprise, well, at least to us in hindsight, that they changed their plans. And this happened during a trip in 1911. James Deering and Paul Chalfin, his chief designer, made a trip to Italy, and they went to see several houses and several estates. And one of them was Villa Rezzonico, which you see here, almost like a black and white photo, but it isn't. Villa Rezzonico is in Bassano del Grappa in the Veneto region of northern Italy. And this house would become kind of the main inspiration for Viscaya, at least as far as the facades are concerned. Now, as you can see in this photo, especially in this photo before its most recent restoration, the facades are quite austere. And even though the facades of Viscaya are a bit more embellished and they have more decorative elements, there is something rather unassuming about this as well, about the Viscaya facades as well. And Witold Trzebinski, he is one of the two authors of this book, Viscaya, an American Villa and Its Makers, that was published in 2007 by University of Pennsylvania Press. He referred to this when he wrote, and I'm quoting this, he's writing about Villa Rezzonico. Deering and Chalfin may have liked the contrast between the exterior and the interior. The house gave no hint of the riches within. And I kind of see that also applied to Viscaya, because when you enter the main house, you are just kind of overwhelmed by all the decorative arts and the furnishings inside the decorated rooms. So in the next slide, and this may come as I don't know, as a surprise to you, Tamara. I'm not quite sure. But so Viscaya, it had found its inspiration and the Deering estate as well in Europe. the architecture, there are European furnishings, antiques, and decorative arts in the main house. The gardens are European inspired. But what I particularly like about Vizcaya is, in spite of these European inspirations and collections, it is a very American product, and it is very firmly grounded in South Florida and in Miami because of the materials that were used for its construction, the coral rock and the plantings, the local flora, but also, and this is, I'm showing this because a few weeks ago I was browsing the internet, looking for some information about the Deering Estate, and I saw some images of these shell ceilings at Vizcaya. No, at the Deering Estate, sorry, which we have also. These photos are at Viscaya. And in addition to the European influences, this is a Caribbean influence because these shells were collected in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, and Bahamians were likely the people who created these shell ceilings. And I should add then that in the late 1800s, Bahamians migrated to South Florida. They created this community in Coconut Grove, and many of the men worked on the construction of Viscaya and tilling the land, working the land, because they were quite familiar with this from the Bahamas, but also creating these shell ceilings. So I was really happy to see these photos of the Deering Estate with similar ceilings.
It is probably one of the features that stands out most to guests. It's kind of the surprise when you walk around one of the verandas. It's just right overhead. We often point it out for that very reason. It is something that you don't expect to see, and the makeup of it, like you said, does come at the hands of most likely Bahamian workers who were helping to build the stone house in the 1920s. And it is a very intricately done piece, one that has a lot of symbolism and a lot of messaging to it that I find echoes through a lot of the other details of the house as well. So it's a really special element.
Yeah, what I thought also was interesting in your first slide, you showed, I think you called it the Great Hall, with an ironwork gate. And that made me think, well, we have a lot of ironwork at Viscaya, and this was created by Samuel Yalin, a very accomplished ironsmith from Eastern Europe. So it is quite likely that many of the artists or artisans who worked on the construction of Viscaya eventually made their way south to work on the stone house at the Deering Estate as well.
That's something that I've actually been looking into because it's such an intriguing possibility. It's one of those elements that just makes sense when you think about all of the development that's going on almost at the same time between the two properties. And knowing that there is a huge force of workers kind of building out Viscaya just at the same time just kind of makes you think, well, we know there's transportation services, there's a car service that is transporting workers into Viscaya. We know at one point Viscaya has 900 workers helping to build out that property. And then you have Charles. There's a huge possibility there that I am very, very, we'll say my historian hat leans very, very close to that possibility. It's one that for us, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of records of past employees, but it's one of the interest areas for us now in telling those stories, finding out really who these people were, their hand in just the development and creating this legacy that really has lasted.
Yeah, just a quick reference. You say about the 900 work people who worked on the construction of Viscaya. So yeah, we have quite a collection of payroll records, financial records, and already we have been able to create a list of 600 individuals by name and by what their specialty was. Um, so we are far.
Remco, we have to talk.
Huh? Yeah, we
We
have to
have
talk.
to talk about this
Absolutely.
list.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, between Vizcaya and the Deering Estate is El Jardín. This is part of it's part now of a school in Coconut Grove. And during a visit a few years ago there is also so much similarity in the decorative style there that it is quite likely that these same artisans, went from one estate to the other and doing their work there. Um, there was a question from Charlotte Dunn about the mosaic. So there's not a photo of the mosaic at Deering Estate, but where is it located at the Deering Estate, Tamara?
It is on I want to say it's the west or south veranda of the stone house. So if you're coming down our main path and you enter into the main porch, the front entrance of the house, and just keep going to the far end and make a right. It's kind of
Okay.
one of the only outdoor walkways.
Well, this calls for a visit, right?
This is the reason, right? You
Yes.
find interesting things like this, and that just makes your day.
Yes. Yes.
So one thing you mentioned, Remco, that I did want to touch on, the ironwork doors that you guys saw in that first image are probably some of the oldest collections pieces, I guess is the best way to say that, in the museum today. They're original to the structure. They're brought in when they're building the house in 1922. They are about 9 feet tall and were restored in 2018. So you see the original color scheme there, but they
We lost Tamara for a moment. All right. All right, I'll keep talking in the meantime. Hopefully, Tamara, I don't know if you can hear us. Let's keep going. All right, I'm going to keep talking. So, Viscaya, Tamara, please come back. Yes, there you are.
I'm back.
You froze for a
Sorry.
moment.
I did. My Wi-Fi kicked out on me.
So I guess we move on to James and Charles. So what I would like to say about these two brothers is that they built their estates around the same time, 1910s, 1920s. They were both major collectors of art, furnishings, antiques. But unlike James, Charles was also an artist himself, quite an accomplished artist. Take it away, Tamara.
So this is one of my favorite things to share with guests, and it comes as such a big surprise to most of them because everyone knows a little bit about Charles in the sense that he's this amazing philanthropist and he has a really savvy business mind. But Charles Deering as an artist is a special guy. He has a talent that I think he really doesn't recognize when he's here. And it's one that we take in today in just a few pieces. We have 3 paintings that he completed himself on display in the museum. And one of them, which we've chosen for this presentation, is a portrait of his stepmother, who is Clara Hamilton Deering, James's mother. And it's one of those that I love showing people because this one and the others are really great examples of how he picks up on small details that really tell a story. And I get the sense that he understood, kind of weaving into all of the paintings that he did, some element of who the person that he was portraying really was. And with Miss Clara Hamilton Deering, you get that she is a little bit of a fashionista. She's got her hat, she's got her cloak with the fur. You just see this lady that just carries herself, and she just kind of looks like she does, she handles herself very well, and there's no doubt about it in that portrait.
Interesting. In the top left, do you think that is a painting or a mirror with the gold frame?
It is most likely a mirror, which we have several gilded mirrors in the collection. And sometimes people think they're actually, I'm sorry, we have several gilded mirrors in the collection, and people mistake them for picture frames. They walk by them and they think, oh, it's just an old frame without the picture inside. And they think that because a lot of them are made with a silver coating the surface, and over time they've tarnished, so they look like an empty picture frame instead. Gold, gilt, silver, you name it, we've got a few of them.
There is a really interesting question here.
Wendy, I like how you think.
Hold on. Can you keep showing that question? I want to use the same. It has faded into oblivion. Where have all the artisans gone? I'll give it one try to answer this. I don't know if it has faded entirely into oblivion, but to just give you an example, when Deering and Chalfin were collecting the decorative arts, the furnishings for Vizcaya, they wanted to furnish the house the way they wanted it, with certain things. And there's in the entrance hall, there is a console and a mirror, and they purchased antiques, and they purchased one of each, the console and the mirror, but they needed two to meet the requirements of symmetry and all that. So what did they do? What did Chalfin do? He ordered from an artisan a replica of the console and a replica of the mirror. You can't really see which one is which, except for what you mentioned, the corroded silver surface of the mirror. But it was just possible to have all this artistic work done at the time, because the people were there, but also it was affordable. And I think now, if you want any type of that work done, yeah, there are still people who do it, but it is so extremely expensive that it's hard to do anything of that now. But what do you think, Tamara?
I will agree with that wholeheartedly. I think one of the things that was really unique about this time was that building and creating homes like this was not nearly as expensive as it would be for us today. You had so many elements that were in place in these types of houses, from the metalwork that was being done, the hand carved elements that were being done, that today are just literally not folded into structures, mostly because of just how intricate the detail is. And it's just a cost thing where people realize the hours that you put in, the cost for the artisans to actually come in and do these things now on this scale, and the materials that you're using. The cost for those is just astronomical.
Right. Now, that's not to say that it was cheap by any means back then.
It was not. It was not. And I will say also, you can sort of see these elements, because what I've found, and we have this here ongoing today. We have an artist in residence program here. And a lot of the artists that showcase their work in the Stone House, they pull on the architectural elements and the elements of the outdoor space for inspiration in their work. So you end up seeing kind of small bits and pieces of that style of architecture and that kind of flair for design show up in some of those exhibits. It's really nice.
Right, right, right. Back to the artistic accomplishments of Charles. During our recent conversations, this came up also, and I just wanted to show this. James Deering made at least 2 trips to Egypt. One in, I believe, 1908, and then also one in March of 1912. So this was right before he started building Vizcaya. So he was on this trip. They went down the Nile with a group of people, and one of them was Charles. And somebody documented this trip through these cartoon-like watercolors. They're really fun with the text, the captions underneath also. And we are pretty certain that that Charles is the creator of these cartoons. So this also kind of shows what Charles' artistic capabilities were.
It also shows his sense of humor too. Some of the captions are pretty funny, and it really just shows a little bit more of his personality. I think we're probably on the right track that he did create these pieces.
They are not on display, Charlotte. They have been on display a number of years ago in a display case at Viscaya. But these being watercolors on paper, watercolors are among the most vulnerable objects or works of art that you can display, and light would do major damage, and light damage is cumulative, so you can only display them for so long. We had them on display in a protected area for a few months, but now I believe you can still find them on the Viscaya website.
You can.
Okay, all right, good.
And this brings us to, so how did the Deerings end up in Miami? And this also is a nice slice of that Miami history. Charles actually is here much earlier than the creation of the Stone House in 1922. He's here in the mid 1900s because he's visiting his father, William, and his stepmother, Clara, who had a home here in the Grove area. And while he's there, he actually starts to take a much deeper interest in South Florida and eventually establishes his first home in apartments in the Brickell house. They rent there for a short time before he starts building his estate at Buena Vista and then later on here at Cutler. But this image shows you the Brickell Point area, which is where his first apartments were located. And this image is interesting because it ties us to an artist friend of his as well, who is another connection between both the estates. I think it might be the next image to come up, but it would be John Singer Sargent, who visits Charles while he's here at his Brickell Point apartments. And this portrait that you see on the left, which is with the Art Institute of Chicago, is actually painted of him sitting at that home. You have a lot of strong connections to our collection here at the Deering Estate and many other museums, including Viscaya, through some of the world's masters in the painting world. And John Singer Sargent is definitely one of those.
Yeah, it's interesting that Sargent was in, I believe, in Ormond Beach to create a portrait of John D. Rockefeller, who had
Mhm.
stay there. And then he went to visit his old friend, Charles Deering, further south in Florida. And that's where he heard about Charles's brother, James, building this estate. And so that's, he was going to be here for a week, and he ended up being in South Florida, in Miami, several weeks. So you saw this photo of Charles at Brickell Point. And can you show that again? And then the image next to that is the next one, and then the image next to that is let me think, the South Arcade in the main house at Vizcaya, one of the sergeant's watercolors, and he painted several portraits. He was that was one of the things that he was known for, Sargent,
Mhm.
to create portraits of famous rich
Very
people.
affluent figures. Yes.
Yes, in the United States. So in the next image, you see the portrait that he did of James Deering, and in the next one, you see a couple more images of that he did at Vizcaya. And you know, these watercolors are really interesting because they really help us. You know, sometimes identify where certain objects were located at the time in 1917. For
Mhm.
example, on the right, this is to the north of the house, and these sculptures are no longer in that area. They are now in other parts of the gardens. So we know that there were several rearrangements, both of furnishings as well as of sculptures in the gardens.
So we do have one question there. I'll leave this one to you.
You know, isn't it true that Sargent stayed at Viscaya a bit longer than what James Deering expected? Uh, yes, yes. There is a letter from James. I think it's a letter to Chalfin, where on the one hand he says, "Well, this man Sargent is staying a little bit too long." I'm totally paraphrasing here, but at the same time, he says to Chalfin, "I hope you meet him too." And at the same time, James was also kind of excited or pleased with the fact that Sargent was so interested in Vizcaya and painted Vizcaya. And besides that, Sargent gave advice on decorative schemes as well, for the colors of these the barber poles at along. You see that in the next image. Uh, yeah, these barber the Venetian poles in the water. He said something like, "Oh, the blue is dirty blue." Which makes the yellow of the poles also dirty, and he advised also on the curtains between the east loggia and the courtyard, and you know it seems that James Deering took his advice to heart because he writes to Chalfin that, "Hey, Charles and John Singer Sargent we think that this and this should be changed." So did he overstay his welcome? Maybe. Was James Deering totally not happy with it? I'm not sure.
I love that you touched on that because one of my ongoing theories here is that Charles Deering definitely has his ears open to all of the different friends and kind of people that he's met and pulling on those for what becomes the Deering estate. We know he's very close friends with who I see as kind of like the creators of the landscape here with John Kunkel Small and even with David Fairchild. And you get the idea that they're giving him kind of advice here and there that goes a long way. So speaking of friends,
Yes.
this is a historic image that we have displayed in the museum, and Remco and I were actually having some fun with this image this past week, doing a who's who. And this is one of the ongoing things that we encounter, I think, between Vizcaya and at the Deering estate is these old photographs that you may or may not have full notations on who is actually shown in these photographs. You may not know where they are. You may not even know why they're all together. But the story that's like waiting there is just kind of pulls us in every single time. And we were trying to figure out who some of the missing people are here that we couldn't identify. We were able to point out a few right off the bat. We have Charles, of course, lounging to to my right. I think everyone else's right too. Is that how this works? Yes.
Yes.
And then on the opposite side, you have Ramon Casas, who is a very close friend of Charles's. He is a wonderful artist, and I get the idea, just a great friend to Charles. Once they meet, it kind of is game over. You know, he's traveling with Charles and James as well. And he has a big part to play in the story that becomes the Maricel estate in Spain, and then later the creation of the stone house. And you also see Phineas Paste, who is the architect of the stone house. And his hand here is definitely, you know, the most prominent as that lead architect. And his work really just kind of emphasizes that Mediterranean style that we all kind of see and recognize as Miami today. It's a very solid aesthetic, but it definitely, like you said, it comes with the inspiration and kind of the influence of these artists that are making suggestions here and there and kind of guiding the hand artistically on what these places will really become.
Yeah, and so Phineas Paste also worked at Vizcaya.
Yes.
And then he did quite a bit of work in Coral Gables. Yeah.
Yes, with Merrick, yes.
Yeah. And then Gary Melchers, Melcher or Melchers, I'm not sure. He was a close friend of Deering. They did some traveling also, and Deering owned one of Melcher's paintings, a portrait of a woman, which is currently at the Art Institute in Chicago.
Yes.
But you know what's interesting also, and by the way, I should say here that we're maybe a little bit hopping back and forth on topics, but it's reflective of the conversations that Tamara and I recently had, and it's just you know, that's part of the having fun, that one thing leads to another. So anyway, so Charles and James Deering, they both collected art and furnishings and decorative arts. Charles especially collected a lot of fine art, a lot of paintings. I mean, if you read the inventory of the Deering estate, right around the time or right after Charles Deering's death, there is just these lists of artists and paintings and sculptures. It's really amazing. Now, James, on the other hand, he was not a big collector of fine art. His goal was really to furnish his house, to make it a comfortable house and to decorate it with these furnishings and decorative arts. He had very few paintings in at Vizcaya. And then, and I love showing this, what you see on the left is the organ in the living room. Then he did have a painting, and then it was cut in half to serve as the panels that you could open so you could see the pipes of the welter pipe organ behind it. But besides, you know, this and a couple of other paintings, he did have a few paintings that were portraits. And in the next slide, you will see on the left, that is a portrait by Anders Zorn. He was a contemporary of John Singer Sargent. He also, from Sweden, he made, I believe, 7 trips to the United States. He also made portraits of some of the, let's say, the rich and famous of the United States. And to some extent, he and Anders Zorn and John Singer Sargent were actually competitors in this world of portraitists, and who would make the best. Portrait of certain people. But anyway, this the lady in the red dress is Abby Deering Howe. She is the sister of James Deering. She died at a very early age. But this painting, and then on the this is in a private collection at the moment. The painting on the right, that is a portrait of William Deering. So that is the father of both Charles and James. And this is in a private collection, but we are very fortunate to have this on loan at Vizcaya, and it is currently on display in the library of the main house. So these two portraits you will see in the next image, they were actually in James Deering's bedroom. So, and on the other wall that you don't see here, there were two more portraits, also of family members. And then there was the portrait of himself by John Singer Sargent that you saw earlier on. So that was pretty much the extent of the paintings that James Deering had, in contrast to Charles, who had so many paintings.
Yes, and counter to that, Charles was an art collector, and you have to imagine the stone house absolutely covered in paintings. And a lot of those were ones that came from Ramon Casas and Sargent. And it's because of his close connections to these artists that were friends that he is able to source in a lot more of those works to build up what becomes such an eclectic collection, a very extensive collection, and one of the world's best at the time. It's something that we have in smaller scale today now on display in the museum. A large part of the collection is gifted to different museums. When Charles passed away in 1927, the main one would be the Art Institute of Chicago. They take a bulk of those works. Charles had something like 3,000 works on paper alone. So that just tells you it is an amazingly detailed collection. He also had historic pieces in his collection as well. Our metal work that you see in some of the chandeliers, those all count for us today as collections, but for fine artwork and paintings, you see the Art Institute of Chicago, the Metropolitan Art Museum at one point exhibited a large selection of his tapestries. You also have, of course, museums that later on his daughters, following in his footsteps, take an interest in contributing to their own community in Boston and in the Midwest. So some pieces end up in museums there. So, and of course, locally, we have lots of things floating around, and they turn up every now and then, and someone says, "Hey, did you know we have this?" And that's how you end up finding out about other historic house museums that talk about Abby and her family, and creates a nice little network. So speaking, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah. So yes.
So I mentioned Charles's daughters continuing in his footsteps, and that's why we have this image up on the screen. This is an image of what we call the Flight into Egypt, which are two stained glass panels that we had recently restored. They are some of the most vibrant pieces that we have in the collection today, and they had been split apart at one point. Marion inherits one and Barbara inherits the other when Charles passed away. And for a time, they would actually both be together at the Viscaya estate and eventually transition both back to the Deering estate. In Charles's time, you would have actually been able to see them while he's living abroad in Spain. They were, or at least the square panel was installed in the Maricel estate as one of the stained glass pieces featured there. And when he travels back to the US in the 1920s to live here permanently year round, they kind of come along for that nice trip over. You have what we think is a much older panel on that left side, and a longer panel with a Latin inscription on the right. But that is your interesting story. It's like a continuation of James and Charles, each taking a different interest in art and antiques. And by default, the daughters kind of do the same. They each like their own paintings, and they kind of start to switch and share between the two estates, inheriting Vizcaya and the Deering estate. So.
Yeah, and I want to mention that also, that James Deering was never married. He did not have any children. So when he died in 1925, his estate went, a large part of it, to Charles Deering, and then eventually ended up with Charles' daughters, Barbara Deering Danielson and Marion Deering McCormick. And you see two busts portraying the two sisters. And these are on display at Viscaya in one of the arcades. And even though they are not original to Viscaya, we want to display these to commemorate the sisters and the work that they did to preserve Viscaya. Because when they inherited Viscaya, it is these two ladies and their husbands who made sure that Viscaya remained what it was. Most of the collections inside the house remained intact. And originally Viscaya was 180 acres that eventually became 50 acres. But it is thanks to them that Viscaya really is what it is today.
It's an interesting thing for me to see that the daughters kind of pick up where James and Charles left off. They started creating these estates that were elaborate for a purpose, whether that purpose was to create kind of an oasis, a relaxation place for them and their families, or a place that would showcase, the world's best art. But it's something that they make sure stays, and they make sure continues on well after they passed on. So it's really interesting.
And to kind of continue the history, so they preserved the estate from late 1920s until the late 1940s, very early 1950s. And at that time, they conveyed the main house, the gardens, and the village to Miami-Dade County, and it became the Dade, at first the Dade Art Museum, and eventually it became Viscaya Museum and Gardens.
And I'll add to that the Deering estate stayed within family hands until the 1980s. Barbara, who is the person that you see on the screen now, she lived here and kind of used the property until 81, when she passed away. And the property was sold to the state of Florida and is now county managed. So they had a very long, kind of lasting impression on the continuation, I think, of both places, and kind of definitely did what they needed to do to make sure that the museum itself at Viscaya, the artwork, the collectibles, all of that kind of had a safe home. So yeah, definitely important.
All right.
So the two images that we're flipping through, we had a portrait of Barbara before this, which was a portrait done by Ramon Casas, that very good friend that we mentioned. And this is another Sargent work. This one is a reproduction of what is called Landscape with Palms. And it's a sketch that Sargent does of the historic boat basin that we have on property. It is one of the features that is expanded on when Charles Deering starts really kind of literally digging into the landscape here to
Wi-Fi.
create this longer to be able to navigate into turnaround boats. And this sketch is one of those that helps us try to pin down, where is Sargent in this Miami picture, in this Miami story? He's painting Rockefellers, he's visiting James, and he's at Brickell Point. And then the question becomes, is he at Cutler? And this image is one of the ones that I have a lot of fun trying to pick apart right now, because there is a historic photograph that almost identically matches it. So your question then becomes, is he sketching this from real life? Is he standing right there? Or does the photograph come first and he's sketching from the photograph? It becomes this nice little mix of what ifs. We don't really know for sure. That's an interesting question.
So for Vizcaya or the Deering estate, special infinite use of the property. Infinite use, no. It's in the case of Vizcaya, Vizcaya is owned by Miami-Dade County since 1953, and since 2017, it is managed by a nonprofit, the Vizcaya Museum and Gardens Trust Inc. So, do they have special access to the property? Yeah, we welcome them. Of course, we welcome them always. And a few years ago, the family. The Miami Corporation, which is located in Chicago, manages the assets of the entire family, and they had a meeting in Miami, and part of that meeting took place at Viscaya. And we are very happy to welcome the family to Viscaya, and they learn about their history, and we learn from them about our shared history. And I imagine something similar is the case for the Deering estate, Tamara.
Yes, definitely. We always welcome them. It is always, for me, as kind of leading the curatorial element for the history here, it's always a special treat just to see faces that sometimes are uncannily familiar from comparing them to some of the portraits that hang on the walls. But they have always been, for me, a treat to welcome again and again. It's one of those things where you hope that just continues. You hope that that presence and what we're doing in the museum just kind of shines enough for them to really see just all the wonderful things that this place has become. It is one of the, I guess, hopes that we just continue doing all the things that the family set out to create this place for. So.
And I should add to that, Wendy, because that's kind of an interesting question. We currently have 2 family members serving on the board of Viscaya as well. So, kind of going back to what I was saying before, Viscaya is owned by Miami-Dade County. It is managed by this nonprofit, but we definitely ask for their input on matters that pertain to the management or to the big picture issues of the collection, for example. So that's also an important governance connection with the family. So
And I will say, with the curatorial work that we do to interpret our site, just the history and the family connection, it's always great to have a touchstone within the family that can verify something as simple as a photograph or a strong connection with family members, because we're expanding the museum and we are looking to incorporate more original pieces from the family collection. Sometimes those come back into the museum. So portraits that hadn't been here for decades now find home again here. So it's really nice.
Absolutely. Okay, so we changed topics for a moment. Back to boating.
Yeah.
This is the boathouse at Vizcaya. That was originally part of Vizcaya. You see in the very top, you see kind of the central pool at Vizcaya. You don't see the main house; that's just outside of there. But the boathouse was destroyed in the 1926 hurricane, so that was the year after Deering died. But it was a very elaborate building. Deering wasn't entirely happy with it, that it became too big and too present. So in a letter to Chalfin, he asked, "Oh, can you have things growing down the walls, so to kind of hide it a little bit, and trees on the roof of the boathouse?" But and sometimes it raises the question about daring and boating, and I think in the next there's a little video clip by Alex Maldonado, who talks about James Deering and boating.
Oh no, no audio.
No, can't hear it.
Charles and James, they also had this other huge passion. They love boats. Charles was a Navy man, and James, when you come by, he has his boat landing. He's got a barge out in the front shaped to look like a ship, and both of them had several yachts. Now, James and Charles, being the avid boatsmen, they make friends with a Carl G. Fisher. Now, Carl G. Fisher was another super powerful man. He is coming around on the heels of the Lincoln Highway that connects the East and West Coast. He's making the Dixie Highway now, connecting Chicago all the way down to Miami, and it terminates at Miami Beach. And so Carl G. Fisher wants to build up Miami Beach. He's got this idea, like, imagine at the end of my highway, a resort island. Wouldn't that be great? And so he's making Miami Beach, and to really promote it, he's got this race, the Miami Regatta. This was a famous race over in 1915, 1916. And James and Charles, they're visiting, and they've got a boat, actually a gift, or it's a trade from Charles Fisher. And they race against Charles Fisher in his own boat at the regatta, and they beat him. If you want to see the trophy, it's in Viscaya. It's on the first floor by the entrance on the case. You can see that trophy there.
So this is probably one of my favorite things to show people, because they're not expecting this. When you walk into the library here, the last thing you expect is this beautiful silver trophy, but there it is. And to me, it's objects like this that are really fun and really just show you Charles the person. He had hobbies just like everyone else, and he was just as competitive as everyone else. When you read through the newspaper clippings about the Biscayne Bay regattas, these people are not pulling any punches. Some people are losing sleep over prepping their boat the night before, and they're really invested in being the fastest, getting the best boat out there in the water. And it is something that is just so normal, and it's just not what you expect. You have such a story that you can relate to in that. I mean, you have every kind of schoolyard competition and every kind of one-upsmanship that you can do with a friend, that they're basically playing out with the Biscayne Bay Yacht Club, who's going to take first place this year. You know, Charles takes it in 1917. Someone else takes it 1915, and that 1915 was maybe his brother.
Yes, so these are the two trophies, the trophies that Alex in the video referred to. They are on display in the main house at Vizcaya. They're on loan from a family member. But I don't want to be a cold shower here, but we tend to speak about James Deering as an avid boater. Alex used those words several times, but was he really? There seems to be some references to that in correspondence in the archives, but also, Catherine Chapman Harwood. She was one of the early chroniclers of Vizcaya in her book Annals of a Great House, and she writes, and I'm going to read this for a moment. Deering had acquired a small fleet appropriate to his seaside villa and had a boathouse built. However, though professing not to be much of a boating man. So Catherine Harwood seems to refer to this question that he had all these boats. He had this humongous boathouse, but was he really that much of an avid boater? So this is a question that remains open-ended, and we still have to figure that one out.
But this is what makes the job fun. It's just the endless, I wonders, and let's go find out more. It's a reason to dig up some more photos and some more letters and keep going.
Absolutely.
So this is another favorite. This is, for me, one of the most interesting aspects of Viscaya and the Deering estate. One of the elements that connects them both is not the houses themselves, it's nature. Both of the brothers had a interesting twist to their properties with incorporating different wildlife elements. And one of those that really stands out is birds. At one point, when Charles was creating his first estate at Buena Vista, he had an open air aviary there that had, well, you see it here, about 3,000 birds just kind of thriving in that location. And it's something that when he is refocusing his attention to create his permanent home here at Cutler, it kind of shifts and you end up with what he's learned and what his workers and the landscapers and the naturalists had kind of pulled apart from Buena Vista, changing the dynamic of the Cutler estate as well. So instead of having a closed in aviary, they now pepper the entire property line with bird houses so that it encourages the migration of birds in a more natural form through the property. It is something that is somewhat different from Viscaya because from what I've heard, Viscaya has a much more flashy element to its birds. None of these wild birds for you. It's all the showy ones and the color and the plumage and all the fancy stuff over there.
Well, to a limited extent, in the next image, there is a letter from, I think it's 1917, from from Deering to Chalfin, writing about birds. And there is this man, Michelini from Louisiana, who has helped Charles Deering to put his collection of, 3,000 birds together. And by the way, this Michelini is also was the proprietor of Tabasco sauce.
Yes.
Anyway, he offers his services to James Deering as well. And in this letter to Chalfin, Deering writes, two things we want different from my brother's outfit. Namely, we want neat and attractive quarters that can be easily kept clean. By the way, the macaws make a terrible smell, and we want an outfit of selection and variety with comparatively few numbers. except in the case of edible birds. We should want a larger supply than of the show birds. So this is really funny. And in the next image, you see these, what is it? The neat, the neat and attractive quarters. This is a beautiful drawing of a bird cage on the left. It's bigger than a person. It doesn't exist anymore, but the one on the right is hanging on the second floor of the main house. So this was for the show birds. But then, you know, as Deering is writing also about the edible birds, in the next image you see just that. The quarters for the edible birds were a lot larger. And these are the outside cages attached to the chicken coop in the Vizcaya village, right along what is now US 1.
And this is one of those things that I think surprises a lot of people. They're so keyed into the artistic element of both the estates. They sometimes haven't even heard of the fact that there's edible birds, you know, at Viscaya. There's kind of intentional agriculture development going on with Charles's Buena Vista and Cutler estates. They are not just focused on the art, they are focused on innovation, I feel, in both places. And that element is something that is so distinct that it's, for me, it's hard to miss. It's one of those things that you see the old photographs like these, and all I see are pelicans, you know, duck houses and monkey sanctuaries like that. And then I wonder, you know, what made them even think that that was something to dabble in and, you know, decide to expand on and try to figure out. And then you just kind of realize that they really were just kind of students of the world around them. They wanted to know about the art, they wanted to know about nature, and where they ended in their knowledge, they tapped on the people that were doing that research and figuring all of that out. So they had some of the leading researchers and naturalists kind of folded into both places, creating things like these edible bird enclosures and strawberries in a kind of very mishap type of way, freezing over in the middle of Florida. Things like that. It's interesting. The monkeys, though, will always literally have me scratching my head because that was a surprise. The monkeys at Buena Vista are probably the funniest moment in, I think, Buena Vista history outside of the strawberries that freeze unexpectedly. They are a project that kind of comes out of nowhere. Charles has over 40 monkeys at one point housed at what people call his monkey island. It was believed then that monkeys couldn't swim, so it would be the safest place for him to have these monkeys in a natural setting that he could have them observed and people could study them and really come to understand, you know, what these monkeys were about. So many different types, and they were going to be so comfortable there. Monkeys can swim. And they did. It was like the mass monkey swim away. And as a result of that, he realizes, you know, maybe not so much. They actually chase him away at one point. So then deal's over, you know, the monkey's got to go. He ends up gifting almost all of them to a zoo in Kansas as a result. But that love for nature, that interest in the animals themselves carries over because you end up with nice little throwback symbolism on the house of the stone house with a carved monkey on one of the pillars, a monkey eating a mango, which was one of the prized crops being grown at his Buena Vista estate. Over, I think at one point, over 3,000 mango trees at the Buena Vista estate, which some of those are transplanted into the Cutler estate when he shifts.
I agree with that last comment. Yes, absolutely.
Can
There
you
are
tell I have fun with that story? That is one of my favorites.
There are so many great stories. I just want to set one thing straight here. There are no edible birds at Vizcaya, not in the village, not in the main house. They are not there anymore. But we are working on restoring the village, and eventually, soon, we will use spaces for programming and for urban agricultural activities. So stay tuned for that. I agree, Wendy.
I've got more.
So I think we need to wrap this up. We are well into the second hour of this live stream. Thank you very much. I want to share a couple of comments before we part. Hold on just a moment. So if you would like to continue exploring Miami history, we encourage you to come visit Viscaya in person and to reserve your tickets online at vizcaya.org. Now, you can also keep learning virtually with the new audio tour the Deering Estate just launched on the Cloud Guide app. And you can download that from your app store right now. Also, the Deering Estate will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Stone House in 2022. So stay tuned for announcements about exciting exhibits and events by following the hashtag Stonehouse100. So, Tamara, big thanks to you for joining us for these great exchanges. And we have to meet again very soon. And
definitely. I'm making a list.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you also very much in the background for making this live stream possible and for feeding us questions and comments. And I would say stay tuned, stay in touch with the Deering Estate and with Viscaya. Have a great day.
Thank you all for joining us.